Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney cruise ships would actually dock there at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact. Look it up. Disney blew $30 million on this place. Yes, you heard me, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and there was even some blame on the cast and workers, saying that since they were in the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work regular schedules. That's where the factual nature of this story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it wasn't because of foreigners are too lazy. Both are just convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt that those reasons were legitimate. Why? I don't buy the official story because of Mowgli's palace. Near the beach side of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a big jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the middle of the whole thing. If you are unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might remember him from the story The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly some fictional highway project. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Co. actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace, surrounded by jungle, staffed with men, women, in loincloths and tribal gear. Well, sufficient to say, everybody flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealth area, but also in somewhat of a xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at this point in history. Well, one of the members of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anybody could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyways, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surroundings communities were flooded with traffic and usual annoyances associated with the influx of the lost, irritated tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. Honestly, didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I lived maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I really only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defecate, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there just felt as angry about Treasure Island as the folks here did about Mowgli's palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what am I getting at? Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not gonna say I wasted no time in getting there, because honestly, it took me another year after I first found out that Treasure Island article to get around to going to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on that palace resort, or rather, I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made of any mention of this palace. It had all been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had a word about that place, though that was to be expected since they all had swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out to loading their embarrassments, you know? Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search site results. Basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather their words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go was an old as hell map I received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it. It just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who had just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where can I find Mowgli's palace?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area mixed with the native species of Florida that actually belonged there and tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates with supports to either side looked like they must have been cut down from giant sequoias. The gate itself had been gouged with several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black. Abandoned by Disney. Clearly the handiwork of some locals or employee who wanted to make a small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive, so I grabbed my camera and the map whose flip side showed a layout of the resort. I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place was just as overgrown as the entry. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bud-riddled refuse. There was a sort of clash between order and chaos as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking black-ended mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by past vandalisms and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing about the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in sort of a courtyard in the front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring into empty space with a silly toothy grin as a birdshit covered whole swaths of his fur, and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint had been pleated and chipped away. The front doors weren't only open, they had been completely taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone had once again painted "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums. But no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the wall. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid the empty echo chamber that amplified my every step, like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was as you would imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances and space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelves. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat. As soon as I stood in for a moment, I noticed the hooks. They were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction. Their movements were so slow and so small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one of them by clutching it in my fist and then carefully letting go. But within seconds, it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were much in the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island Resort, someone had smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts or other implements. There was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there for very long. What's odd is that the toilets and sinks all dripped, leaked, or ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut off the water long, long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through them all. The few that I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. Though there was actually a television or a radio in one room, as I really did think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing, echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on the mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. A short, unknown reply. I didn't know that. Your father told you. An unknown reply, or possibly just weeping. I know. That sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced. Why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants that had held up there and probably would have knifed me to death. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted the trip. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I apparently missed. Something that would give me one thing to show for my troubles, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe 8 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal, right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo. Then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer to the pedestal to get the detail of its face. But slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, and then turned and slowly slithered away, across the grass and into the trees. All 8 feet of it. Its head had long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals into the grounds. Right there on the floor plan was the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks in Treasure Isle, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. I took a few deep breaths and a slap to my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in broken glass, a dead leaf carpet, or haul myself onto a desk of questionable reliability. I'd seen some stairs near the palace lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for the startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with "Abandoned by Disney," motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led down to ground level. Using my camera flash as sort of an improvised light, I could see the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock and a sign, a real sign, reading "Mascots Only. Thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit, for 2 reasons. 1, a mascots only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. 2, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there, not to vandalize, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore, and perhaps find something interesting to photograph, or want only steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing myself that I was only okay to take anything that I wanted, because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall the padlock was hooked onto. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall, something that nobody else had apparently thought of or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was startling and very welcomed change for the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens. There were clocks, even a punch-in clock on the wall completely filled out with time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old static television and a long rotted out food and drinks on the counter. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything was left in the state of evacuation. As I walked the maze, like sub-basement hallways of the mascots only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melded with the damp floor, and large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Everything wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words, Character Prep 1, stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That's it. Until I gave up and started to walk away. That was when there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open slowly. Inside the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch on the wall, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickered, and fading out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the lights were going to burst. Just when I thought it was going to reach a critical stage, the lights dimmed and steadied. The room was exactly how I pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from visible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes, and another toward the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the room, like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the color of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should have been white, and white where he should have been black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing that thing until last. I took a picture of the costume hanging on the wall, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show the entire row of putrid cartoon faces with some plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of the bed-wrangled characters' heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there, between my shoes, was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the head immediately, as you expect, and I moved to the door. I stood in the doorway. I looked back at the skull on the floor and thought to myself, I have to take a picture of it, you know? I just have to. For any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if I was just gross, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, that photo negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood there, at the center of the room, its face just staring directly at me as I mumbled "no" over and over and over. With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The camera's display screen only showed dead pixels in the shape of the living thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey Mouse costume as the camera moved in my unsteady hands. The dead pixels spread, mirroring the screen, whatever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died, went blank and quiet and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Want to see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy gloves around its neck with crawling, impatient movements, similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood, so much thick, chunky, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard the sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the door, out of this room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not my very life, I knew why Disney did not want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in, or anything like that getting out.